Right, a lot has changed with the Mazda, so what we'll do is we'll just do a rundown of what's been done and what is left to do before the MOT. So we'll start at the rear and we'll work our way forward. On the last video I was getting them rear panels welded in, and I am glad to say all the welding is done on this car. Well, I've got a tiny bit to do, but I'll get onto that later. With them panels in, I just need to get them rear arches all ready for paint, so that's going to be a day of sand and prep, but I'm going to leave that to be one of the last jobs to do. While I had the entire rear end stripped, I used the opportunity to give all of the underbody of the car a bit of TLC. I gave the underneath a really good clean and dealt with any rust and old underseal to get back to a solid base to work from. The old underseal had had its day and was causing more issues than solutions. Water was just getting behind the seal in various places and just rotting it out from behind. But once I was back to a good footing, I gave it a really good paint, starting with a rust prevention primer. After this, I moved on to a few coats of tough gloss black metal paint, and then to finish it off with a layer of impact resistance underbody seal. I'm hoping this will keep any future rust at bay. Once a year I can get under here and give it a good inspection to see any areas that need attention. As they say, prevention is the best cure. While I had all the back out, it was only a few bolts and pipes to drop the fuel tank, and I am so glad I did. I gave the inside of the tank a good inspection and the fuel pump, and everything inside was looking really good. But outside of the tank had started to rust, so it's onto the boring task of removing all that old sealant. Here you can see the tank all clean and the rust spots. I treated the rust using PC7 and Rust Buster Tank Guard to give this tank a new lease of life. The tank guard was easy to use and just comes in a two-part with a mixture of 1:1, so you can either paint it on with a brush or use a spray gun. But I didn't fancy cleaning out the spray gun, so I opted for using a brush. And to be honest, I was happy with the results. So before getting the tank back in, I replaced all of the old steel fuel lines with new aluminium hard lines. This was due to the old lines hanging on by a thread. No, literally, they snapped as I was removing the fuel filter. For example, this is part of the old brake line. It literally just snapped. So they definitely needed replacing. What seems to happen is it seems to corrode around the clips that hold the lines in, and that just rubs away on the protective coating, and eventually it just builds up with gunk in there, which just retains moisture and just slowly starts to rust out the old steel lines. That's just a thing to check. If you have still got steel lines, just check around the clips and make sure they're not rusting out. I also replaced all of the rubber hosing with R9 fuel hose. With the fuel tank all sorted, it was finally time to get the new subframe in. This was to replace the old, rusty, stinky old frame. This was a massive moment for me, mainly because I spent the last 6 months falling over it and just banging my shin on it every single time I want to get down the side of the car. Jess has got a scar on her shin from it, and she will never let me forget it. With the subframe in place, I put in new bushes at the diff, gave it all a good paint, and installed the rear coilovers. At this point, I felt like I was making some really good progress with the car, mainly because I started to put things back in rather than just taking everything out. I think it's just spitting. It's gonna go off any second now. Then I just had to put the PPF back in the power plant frame, but while doing that, I broke this sensor. This is the sensor that comes out the side of the catalytic converter, and all it does is let you know when the cat is getting too hot. After doing some research, this only really came on the Unos models, and it's just a basic temperature sensor and it's not really needed. So with this, I've got a few choices. I can either drill the bolts that had snapped and retap them so I can refit this, or I can just weld the hole and remove the sensor. I can go down the road of installing a sports cap or a D cap, as this would completely eliminate this sensor altogether, and I can legally run a D cap on this car and still meet all the regs. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know in the comments of what you think the best option would be, because I can't make up my mind. That is pretty much the rear of the car done. I just need to sort out that sensor issue, a couple of bits with brakes. Later on I want to put some of this heat shielding around the rear of the transmission tunnel and stuff, and around where the cat is, just to remove some of that heat from the cabin. but that's going to be for a later video where I just get loads of odd jobs done. So now let's move up to the front and have a look at the engine bay. So up here at the front, it was just mainly a case of just cleaning everything up and giving it a really good service, including all new belts and pulleys. I did have to get a new alternator as the old one was not putting out the correct voltage to charge the batteries. I believe this to be an issue with the alternator on the 1.6 V-belt style alternator being internally regulated and not done by the ECU like the later 1.6 and 1.8s. But I've now got a nice shiny new one buried all the way down there. I cleaned up all the injectors and the intake manifold. This had just years of just gunk build up on it. I got the manifold looking really nice and shiny, but in the end I ended up painting it black, but I kinda wish that I'd stayed with the shiny look now. I don't know, what do you think? I have thought about trying to get another one of these from eBay or Marketplace and just giving it a really good polish to see how shiny I can really get it to replace this black one, but I'm not sure. Maybe in the future. A lot of the mess had come from unsolved oil leaks, so we got new gaskets and O-rings all the way around. One of the main sources of the oil was the rear cam angle sensor. It was just leaking oil, which is a common issue, but it's easily solved by popping this off and putting on a new O-ring. Putting it back in the same place is a challenge, as this controls the electronic timing, and moving this sensor can knock the timing out, so I always check it with a timing light afterwards. I gave the engine bay a paint in places to give a bit of a fresher look, as it was just so much easier to access with all of this removed. I did have some rust underneath this light, which was easily solved. Just weld a new panel in there, but the hardest bit was getting this light back in. That was not a fun afternoon. I replaced all the old hoses with these new silicone hoses from Stony Racing, and I got these really nice stainless steel clamps as well. The only one that I haven't replaced is this one that goes to the brake booster, mainly because this one has actually got a one-way valve here, and without that you'll just create a vacuum leak. I need to see if I can find something to replace that with a nice new hose. I got a new radiator and I went with a Jatspeed 50mm alloy rad, mainly because, well, shiny. I also had to replace the power steering cooler. This Mishimoto rad you can just see down there. Mainly because the old line that used to run down here was just in a really bad way, and it was just cheaper using that than it was to try and get a new line. Oh, I also forgot, I also replaced the engine mounts as well, because the old ones had just deteriorated to the point where it was just letting the engine just slop about and do whatever it wanted. So putting in some new engine mounts have really kept the engine in place. So one of the last parts was getting everything back into the engine bay and just doing the final touch-up jobs like painting the rocker cover, getting all the fuel lines plumbed up, and just everything looking in place and nice. And also working out where some of the wires that I'd missed out went. With everything back in place, it was time to get some fluids and give some fuel and turn the key. It started up, but it had this awful tapping sound due to one of the tappets being seized and not being fully primary oil, and the car for some reason was idling at 2000 RPM. I suspected that the RPM was due to a vacuum leak, and I was right. I found out that there was a small line under the intake manifold that had come off during installation, but after getting this back in place, the idle had dropped. Next was getting that tappet sorted out and primary oil so it could stop making that awful clattering noise, which to be honest with you worried me at first. I also noticed that the temperature sensor on the clock was not working, and this is because I had not connected this little wire. The main water temperature sensor at the back of the engine, and this is for the ECU, and I had to replace this due to it causing misfires. But it has got a second connection, which sends that signal to the dash that I'd missed out. Oops. After a few hours of tinkering and making sure everything was good, it was time to give it another go, and... the car works now. It runs nice and quiet and smooth. Getting the car started was a massive moment for me because I look back at all the old videos and old pictures of when I was crawling around under this car, welding and sorting out all these issues, and I never thought I would get to this stage that I'm at now. But I have still got more to do before it's back on the road for this summer. The car currently has no brakes at all, so I need to get them sorted out. I'm currently cleaning up the brakes and getting them ready to be put back on, but also at the rear of the car I need to flare the rear line because that's not done yet. I'm also waiting to be able to allocate some funds to get some braided hoses. But then it's pretty much on to painting them rear arches, sorting out that cat sensor, and I also need to sort out the fog light as well, because it currently doesn't have a rear fog, which I need to put one in. I also want to tidy up all this wiring and stuff, because currently it is all just a little bit of a mess. As you can see, like the diagnostic ports there. Yeah, just give the wiring a general tidy and make sure everything's looking good. Once all this is done and the brakes are in and that's all bled up, it is pretty much MOT time, which I'm looking forward to. I really want to enjoy it over the summer, and I want to move on to doing some mods that I really want to do in the future. Also, potentially I'm going to have another project starting, so that might happen in the future as well. Well, that's you all caught up with the car now, so if anyone has any questions at all, feel free to comment and I'll get back to you. In the next video, what I'll be doing is I'll be sorting out all the brakes, getting them all nice and clean and painted and back into the car, and it'll be nice to have some brakes again. So, see you next time.